If you are neurodivergent, beware of taking productivity advice from and for neurotypicals at face value. By Spencer Antonio Marlen-Starr, published on my Medium blog under that name on January 2nd, 2024. Introduction. I am not a neurotypical person. In fact, I'm not even remotely close to being one on account of my having been diagnosed with the common trifecta of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Tourette syndrome at the same time by my child neurologist, who has ADHD herself, by the way, when I was in the second grade. She also diagnosed me with some strangely severe version of dysgraphia that has gotten worse and become much more general than just writing. Forget the official name. My hands barely work. It hurts to even tie my shoes sometimes. Anyway, as an adult, and has confused 3 different neurologists so far. Then later on, as a young adult, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and, quote, specific learning disability, reading. And according to ChatGPT-4, that means dyslexic, but my neuropsychologist didn't help me out by saying it just means dyslexic. Now that I have my neurodivergent bona fides out of the way, I shall proceed to the crux of the matter. I really, really like learning. I thirst for knowledge, and I also want to be at least mildly successful in this life. Back when I first began college, age 18, during my first semester, I took a course called College Success. I wanted to make sure I was learning and retaining as much information as possible. This course was meant to teach us community college students good habits and strategies for taking notes, studying, learning, reading, and remembering the material in our courses. Common shorthand is learning how to learn. Much of what we were taught in that course were note-taking systems and or note consolidation approaches to make study guides for exams from lecture notes. 2 examples I still remember are the Cornell note-taking system, along with the mind map approach for note consolidation. In the article on my blog, I include an image showing the Cornell note-taking system, an example of it. Cornell approach to structuring the notes you write down during a lecture looks like it might be quite useful, but I wouldn't know because I cannot write my own lecture notes due to my severe dysgraphia, so it is entirely irrelevant to me. This is likely the most straightforward example of a neurotypical tool in terms of how quickly I was able to realize it did not apply to me, because in this case, it could not. So I didn't waste any more time on it, fortunately, but I was not so lucky in most cases. I ended up getting an A in that college success course, but felt quite underwhelmed in terms of practical skills or strategies I could implement going forward. Afterwards, I would always keep an eye out for learning how to learn tutorials, which sometimes would be included by an instructor in the syllabus as an optional thing to help us out in his or her course. Several of the people who made these boosting your studying efficiency or productivity tutorials that I so eagerly consumed with great zest recommended that I should watch these tutorials or others that I use to supplement my textbooks and lectures at 1.5 or 2 times speed so I could get through them faster. I also heard elsewhere the same advice for audiobooks, and I was, and still am, a big consumer of audiobooks. So, I took their advice and began to listen to my books on Audible at 1.5 or 2 times speed for well over a year, learning absolutely nothing from any of them. I would do the same thing with YouTube tutorials. For example, calculus-based physics lectures with the ones on the same few topics from Yale as I was learning in my course at the time. but I was not learning anything from them and ended up getting a D plus in that first calculus-based physics course. How was this happening? Why was my being proactive, more so than most other students, somehow backfiring on me? Simple. The advice in most learning how to learn and or study tips tutorials is given by neurotypical people, and it is meant to and for neurotypical people. This is not a bad thing, which you should get mad at them for, but we as neurodivergent people can only hope for the best while doing these methods. Neuropsychological testing. Some of you reading or listening to this article might ask yourselves, how could this guy not have noticed he wasn't understanding the audiobooks he was listening to for more than a year? Well, I thought I was practicing or acclimating to this faster pace. I just wanted to be a more efficient learner so badly. My counterproductive hope was not fully derailed until after transferring from my community college in Central California to UC Irvine. The Disability Services Center there required me to go through a full battery of neuropsychological tests to confirm my ADHD and dysgraphia diagnoses, while simultaneously ruling out a low IQ as the cause of any academic difficulties I was going through when I first got there. Side note, their stated reason for requiring this evaluation was because I had gotten diagnosed in a small town where all my child neurologist went off of when she diagnosed me with the common trifecta of ADHD, OCD, and Tourette syndrome, and dysgraphia as well, was symptoms via rating scales, the oral history, and the fact that one of my older brothers already had been diagnosed with the same trifecta. I found out about a year later whilst listening to audiobooks about ADHD testing. The research actually shows that these rating scales are the better tool and the oral history is essential. By better, I mean better than fancy neuropsychological testing. Back to the article. After finishing all of these tests, which were quite intense for the record, my neuropsychologist broke it into three 60 or 90-minute sessions, if I remember right. All of my prior diagnoses had been replicated, plus the others included in the first paragraph of this article. However, there were specific aspects of my cognition which were quantified, and one of them was that my mental processing speed is below the 8th percentile. This means that among a random sample of 100 Americans my age, I think more slowly than 92 of them. This is not the same thing as being stupid. In fact, my IQ score was quite high. Knowing your brain. This instantly explained why I was not able to understand the audiobooks and YouTube tutorials when played at faster than normal speeds, so I stopped and never went back. Nowadays, I adjust depending on the video, podcast, or audiobook, but I play almost all of them below normal 1.0x speed. For this reason, the fact that the results include quantitative estimates of how your mind works, I highly encourage anyone reading this to get evaluated if you already know that you are not neurotypical, that is. Anyone with ADHD, dyslexia, sluggish cognitive tempo, Asperger's syndrome, or some combination of them would benefit from a full battery of neuropsychological tests to uncover some specific idiosyncrasies in how they think and learn. And like I said, quantitatively estimated idiosyncrasies. For instance, I also learned that I have impaired aspects of my memory besides just the working memory deficits, which are standard for ADHDers. So now I use the Anki flashcard app to help me remember things. Quantifying your productivity is key. This part of the article is the most important, and after realizing it myself, I have been shocked that I have never come across this point elsewhere by anyone ever. As I briefly mentioned toward the beginning of this article, I have a titanic passion for the field of economics. My dream was to obtain a doctorate in the discipline and become an economist. Starting at the age of 16, I was watching economics lectures on YouTube in my spare time and listening to economics podcasts while driving around and doing my laundry. Unfortunately, although I did not realize it at the time, it is not possible for me to obtain a PhD in economics because of my specific combination of disorders, conditions, and learning disabilities, regardless of my 99.9th percentile level of interest in economics and my high IQ. How so? Simple. Let's start with reading. When you have dyslexia and ADHD, one thing you should do is time how many words per minute you read. Ideally, you would do this using several different free reading speed tests online. I post I posted links to 3 of them in the actual article on my Medium blog, and then calculate the average of those tests. Do this for normal light reading. Then do it all again for technical or mathematically dense material if you have physical reading materials on technical topics handy using the test described here. Where in the article there's another quote to a way you can calculate your reading speed yourself. Let's call that your OWPM, optimal words per minute. From there, if you have ADHD, you need to know how many minutes each hour you will actually spend reading. So, you need to factor in how often you need your ADHD study breaks every hour and how many minutes for each break on average. Then you add them up in terms of minutes to get typical minutes not studying per hour you are devoting to studying. It's that simple. Once you've calculated that estimate, subtract it from 60 to get an estimate how many minutes per hour you can study realistically and consistently. Then divide that amount by 60 to get the proportion or the percentage of the hour spent actively studying. Let's call this your SE, studying efficiency. Now multiply that proportion, SE, for studying efficiency, by your reading speed in words per minute, OWPM, optimal reading speed, to get your actual words per minute reading time. So you multiply your studying efficiency by your optimal words per minute to get your average words per minute. If you are anything like me, you will find that there are not nearly enough hours in a day to read the number of pages from textbooks and academic papers which are required in most graduate programs in almost any field. This process of crudely calculating or estimating how efficiently you are able to read is absolutely necessary for folks with more than one diagnosed form of neurodivergence, which often or usually slows one's productivity. Furthermore, it is a general guesstimation guideline, meaning it is not just for reading. So whenever you are trying out new productivity advice from and or for everybody, that is to say, from and or for neurotypical people, after giving it whatever you think is a reasonable trial period, attempt to quantify your productivity beforehand and after. And even if you don't have the patience to actually do a rough back of the hand envelope calculation the way I described above, just remember to really try to remain vigilant for any noticeable changes in your productivity. To take an example other than effective reading speed, meaning with comprehension and ADHD study breaks, if I'd thought of this approach back when I first heard the advice to speed up any audio or video material, I could have listened to consecutive segments in an audiobook of similar or identical lengths at varying speeds, and at the end of each one tried to see how much information I could recall. I only listen to nonfiction audiobooks, by the way. This might not work for fiction. And if I could summarize what I would just heard, I would have figured out very quickly that I couldn't recall a single piece of information if the playback speed was at or above 1.5 times normal speed, which would have saved me over a year of wasted time and misplaced hopes and dreams. The end.